My name is Sarah Buchert, and this story is called ADHD and Me. Now, for those of you that don't know about ADHD, let me give you a few pointers. Kids with ADHD, they're not your average everyday kid. I mean, they act and think differently than other people, and as a result, society judges them. Kids with ADHD, they don't have many friends. I mean, not lots of people can stand the personalities. They never sit still, they're very absent-minded, and they speak without thinking, and that can be kind of painful for those that hear it. And that is where this story begins. This story is set in the Mesozoic era amongst a society of dinosaurs. Now, this society is ruled by herbivores, the carnivores being the few minority, and because of that, they're treated differently. Now, the first carnivore I'm going to tell you about is Mr. TR. Now, Mr. TR, he was your normal T-Rex, which means he had a lot of energy, and he could never sit still in class. So he'd walk into class, sit on the desk, swing his legs to get some of the energy out so he could focus. But the teacher, he didn't like that at all. So he would force Mr. TR to sit in a chair and learn the exact same way the other kids did. And that didn't work for Mr. TR. So he was sent out of class multiple times for being disruptive. And that continued on throughout his high school year. But I mean, what can he do? It's who he is. He couldn't change it. I mean, eventually he adapted and he found other ways to channel it, less obvious ways. But he couldn't have changed who he was. Now the second dinosaur I'm going to introduce you to is Mr. Velocity. Now, Mr. Velocity was wicked smart, but he was only really smart in science. But he learned hands-on, so any lecture class he had, he didn't fare too well because Mr. Velocity suffered from a short attention span. So the teacher would talk for 45 minutes, Mr. Velocity was gone after the first 5. And as a result of this, there was some strife between him and the teacher. I mean, if a kid's not paying attention in class, you're going to notice, especially when it's as obvious as Mr. Velocity was. But there was one herbivore, Mrs. J. Oh, she was a nasty piece of work, let me tell you that. Anybody's deserving of being called bad names, it's her. I can't say them, of course, but. Now, Mrs. J, she hated Mr. Velocity simply because, in her view, Mr. Velocity coasted through school. He didn't pay attention in class, and he took everything not serious at all. And Mrs. J, she had to study hard for hours and hours to get the same grade in science class that Mr. Velocity didn't have to study for at all to get. And so for years, Mrs. J, she'd shoot him glances in her eyes, wishing, hating her existence. You know the glances that say, I wish you weren't born? Yeah, you guys all know what I'm talking about. And that went on for 3 years. Mrs. Velocity knew no idea why Mrs. J hated her so much. It wasn't until somebody finally told her after they parted ways that she understood all of that misplaced hatred. Now, what goes hand in hand with intellect is curiosity. Am I right? I mean, if you're curious, you're normally intelligent. Now, that should be a good thing, right? It's good to be curious, to know lots of stuff, to want to know everything, right? I mean, am I right, guys? Yeah. Wrong. It's bad. Curiosity is like a fly that buzzes in you. You want to go smack, eliminate the fly, because it's annoying you. Now, Mr. Stompy, he suffered from a bad case of curiosity killed the cat. But he had a second phase for it, but satisfaction brought it back. So Mr. Stompy, he was always getting in trouble. I mean, he liked to steal stuff from his family. I mean, he could get away with it. He was smart enough to cover up his tracks. But eventually he learned that it's better to ask instead of stealing. Okay, I digress. He learned that it's better to ask before you steal. I mean, if they said no, you gave it a try. They didn't give it to you. What you gonna do? I wanted it. Now the last dinosaur I'm gonna introduce you to is Mrs. Pteranodon. Now, Mrs. Pteranodon, she was a small carnivore in a society of the big herbivores, and thus clothes felt differently to her. So all those short shorts gave her wedgies, irritated her skin, and those tight sleeves, oh, they caused her no amount of trouble. And thus she developed her own fashion sense. Now, when it comes to fashion between her and everybody else, it's best left at she has her opinions, you have yours, and trust me, she knows which one's right, and it's not yours. I can tell you that much for sure. And because of that, she dressed how she wanted to dress. She thought she matched. She thought she looked amazing in her clothes. She'd strut down the school like, look at me, guys. I got everything. So she ignored the eyes which focused on her and said, dear God, you literally just woke out of bed and put on that? My God, go jump off a cliff. And that she didn't really care for that. And because she was so confident in her personality and who she was and how her clothes expressed herself, she gained a bit of a superiority complex down the line. I mean, Eventually, she cooled down and she learned to accept the clothes that other herbivores wore, but she still had a little bit of a superiority complex. I mean, she was different and she knew it. Now, each of these dinosaurs, they faced their own struggles. I mean, it's not easy being a carnivore in a society of herbivores, but they were all different in their own way. And because of this, society rejected them. Society likes to suffer from what I call sheep mentality. It's the group mentality of to follow one leader. If you're not with them, you're out of here, ostracized. Hasta la vista, baby. And that's what society suffers from. But each of these dinosaurs, how they faced society's persecutions shaped them into who they are today. Each one of these dinosaurs represents a different aspect of my ADHD personality. I have overcome most of what was troubling me back in my days, but I still sometimes fall prey to the sheep mentality present in society. I mean, it's hard not to when you're constantly surrounded by it. But I have to say, my firsthand experience with being treated differently because of ADHD has led me to be more understanding and accepting of other people. They might not give me the same courtesy, but I can say with positivity that I accept people for who they are. Okay, I try my best to accept people for who they are. I mean, nobody's 100% perfect. But that's hard because even today, unconsciously, us humans as a race, we still suffer from prejudice. We might not know it, we might not even know we express it, but we still do it unconsciously.